Oh, colleagues lift each other up. Colleagues.
Welcome to Decoding TV's coverage of Severance Season 2, Episode 8. I have a couple of meta comments to start with. First of all, I want to acknowledge that a lot of people are watching these reviews and recaps on YouTube. Welcome. I want to say, by the way, a significant portion of people who watch us on YouTube do not subscribe to us on YouTube. So if you're one of the people, if you're one of the like 50, 60% of people who are watching this video at youtube.com/@decodingtv and you're not subscribed, be sure to hit subscribe. And we bring you lots of TV coverage of what's happening right now in the world of streaming and occasionally broadcast. All right. I have really enjoyed talking about Severance with Patrick Klepek this season. And when we record our episodes, we actually record them before the episode has been released. And then, so we don't know any of the reaction to the show. And so we're just kind of putting our opinions out there and hoping that people will, it will resonate with people. There's actually a really salient reason I'm mentioning it this week because this episode seemed to be in rougher shape than the other episodes that we got. So there was no closed captioning for this episode. And so usually I rely on closed captioning to like identify names and other things. So if I miss anything this episode, that's partially why. Is like I didn't have the closed captioning, didn't see, like there were some words I literally couldn't understand. So just mentioning that. The other reason I mention it is because this season of Severance has had some of the best episodes of television of the last few years, right? Like episode 4, episode 7. These are like legendary all-timer episodes. So like nothing I say this week can take away from how brilliantly some of the episodes this season have been executed. Having said all that, season 2, episode 8 of Severance is certainly my least favorite episode of Severance that's ever been released. Possibly the worst episode of Severance that's ever been made. And I did not care for it. And I wanted to just start and say, like, that's what my opinion is. And I want to ask Patrick what his opinion is. But I'm just letting you know, like, that's what my opinion is. And also, like, not very much happens this episode. It's the shortest episode of the season, I believe. And so I actually want to spend some time talking about follow-ups to last week's episode because that's more interesting in my opinion. But anyway, just wanted to like open with that so people know where I stand. Patrick Klepek, what do you think about this episode?
I think this episode of Severance will be very important to the Severance industrial complex of pausing the episode to look at things and ponder, is that high resolution enough for me to extract some information from it? The amount of times I paused this episode to try and read part of a yearbook or a newspaper headline, it is the worst elements of Lost mystery box style shows that pander to parts of the internet, that pause things and examine them for clues about where things might go, how things are connected. I thought until this moment in the show, like Severance is a post-Lost, post mystery box show that understands a lot of the lessons that shows didn't learn as they've tried to construct narratives in this style. And this episode feels like it tosses all of that out and engages in the worst kinds of impulses with a character that is deeply unlikable and yet spends the entire time doing its best to take a shovel to create empathy. And maybe it'd all be worth it in the end. But I was constantly frustrated. Like a 37-minute episode that took me an hour to watch because I'm clicking back on my remote, like, what are these two mumbling characters saying?
Yeah.
Hey, for the 7th time, we've like turned like the focus on the lens to go blurry to sharp so that like you can highlight a poster or like a plaque on the wall. Is that important? I don't know, but the show's doing it every third. I deeply frustrated is how I came out of this episode, and that's only exaggerated by like kind of relative disappointment, right? Like the season has just been otherwise, not without fault, but just absolutely incredible, and we're coming off an incredible high. And this feels like, we have to move this piece on the chessboard back, and we're not going to waste time with other characters. We're just going to get this over. We're just like, it's like a Band-Aid the show has to take off. Like, ready? We're going to rip it. We're going to rip it. We're going to rip it. It'll be worth it. It'll be worth it. Ow! 37 minutes of your time is sort of wasted, but it'll be worth it because like it plays like a fun rock song. And she hits the gas and heads back to our main characters.
Okay, here is rampant David Chen speculation. Like
Please.
I'm not. This is not even. This is not based on anything I've read in interviews or anything like that. I'm just going to go out there and say this. Okay.
Yeah.
This episode should not have happened. This should not have been Miss Cobell's story. And the problem with this show is Miss Cobell already had her arc, right? Like her arc was already completed, right? And or mostly completed, and she has at best a side character from this point forward. But the show has a problem because you have this extremely acclaimed actress named Patricia Arquette in the show, whose arc is basically already done from season 1. And it's like, hey, we got to get Patricia Arquette back in the mix. Like, we got to give her interesting things to do. This feels like it reeks of, we got to give talented person interesting things to do, as opposed to something that feels really organic to the story. One of the biggest criticisms people had about episode 7, which was otherwise an excellent episode, was why would Devin call Miss Cobell? Like, that makes absolutely no sense. And I was thinking, oh, well, maybe that's going to be just like a temporary random idea that they're never going to bring up again. Nope. Obviously becomes a huge part of this episode. Devin, the person whose baby might have been threatened with by Miss Cobell. Devin, who suffered from lactation, was inflicted with lactation fraud by Miss Cobell. You know, like, it makes no sense for the characters. Like, none of the characters are behaving in a way that is reasonable at all, based on everything we know about them. And I think it actually like makes the show, like, depending on how hard they pursue this, it makes the show worse. It reminds me a lot of this Star Trek show, this Star Trek The Next Generation episode called Sub Rosa. Have you ever heard of you ever watched Star Trek The Next Generation?
Not a Star Trek person.
Well, brilliant show.
Oh, yeah, I'll write it down.
And in Star Trek Season 7, Episode 14, there is an episode called Sub Rosa. Now, what Sub Rosa did was it took this character named Dr. Beverly Crusher, who's kind of like this, like, basically has always been a side character. And it's like, what if we gave Beverly Crusher her own episode, right? And I'll just read the Wikipedia plot summary. Dr. Crusher attends her grandmother's funeral and spends time in her grandmother's haunted house, romanced by her grandmother's non-corporeal lover. So she has sex with a ghost that her grandmother was into, basically. And also reading from Wikipedia here, in 2016, fans of the 50th anniversary Star Trek convention voted Sub Rosa as the 6th worst episode of any Star Trek series. It's just widely regarded as like, it's like so different from any other episode. It's like, wow, that's random. Like, do we really need to do that? Like, that's how I feel about season 2, episode 8 of Severance. Like, they wanted to give Cobell her own episode, and it's like literally all the stuff that's discovered. First of all, this episode could have been an email. Like, you did not need to have an whole episode for this. And then literally the stuff that is discovered makes the show worse. And we're going to talk about how how that is.
Yes.
In the recap you are about to hear. So those are some initial thoughts. Let's talk about some follow-ups from last week's episode of Severance before we get to this week, because I think, not much happens this week. All right. I feel more convinced now than ever that my theory last week is accurate, which is like they're trying to figure out a way to sever all negative emotions from people, right? Like J2 Theg on YouTube writes, the rooms Gemma enters seem to be a test to see if pain and suffering can transcend the severance barrier. After Gemma has visited all the rooms which seem to elicit fear or her anxieties, the doctor asks if she remembers anything or feels a pull to certain rooms. She can only distinguish certain rooms by how her physical body is affected, like her sore hand or mouth. I think Cold Harbor is her ultimate last test and humanity's biggest fear of all, death. Lumen is trying to cheat death by severing the consciousness into different pieces so that if one of the pieces experiences death, the others can theoretically live on forever, end quote. You had me until that last piece. That doesn't really make much sense to me that one of your severed innies could die. But one theory that I heard that I really
experienced trauma, right? Like the
trauma. But I think the theory that I heard that feels most accurate to me is that Cold Harbor is about losing a child. Because that's what
Yes.
Gemma actually went through, right? So
and,
she
and
actually,
I think it
Yep.
feels I think rightful speculation that did she experience the miscarriage as a result of experimentation from Lumen itself?
Right. Yeah. So like that's my guess as to what Cold Harbor is. Like they're like, hey, can you feel? Can you forget the pain of being in a plane crash? Can you forget the pain of dentist work? Can you forget the pain of writing a gajillion thank you notes? And then ultimately, can you forget the pain of like the ultimate pain, which everyone universally regards as like one of the most horrifying pains of all, losing a child? That's what Cold Harbor is. And it is scary. There's probably something horrifying in that room, right? So like. That is my guess as to what it is. Again, none of us actually, neither Patrick or I actually know. This is just our speculation.
But I would be, I guess for a show full of surprises, I shouldn't say I would be surprised if this didn't happen. But all the cards on the table seem to suggest that that is ultimately what Cold Harbor is. Like, I strongly suspect that at some point this season, Gemma's going to walk into that room. She's going to, ahead of walking in that room, put on some dress, some sort of like body suit that like she's going to experience a miscarriage, like in an actor-like form. And then Cold Harbor is about, can you forget that loss? Like, I think that is where I think that's like where this season is headed. Gemma's not getting out of that floor at the end of this season, I don't think, but I do think she's going to experience that loss and test the severance barriers to their extreme before the season is up.
There are a couple of other comments to make about Gemma's adventures last week. The Nikolya commented on YouTube that in the thank you note scenario, she's made to write thank you notes with her left hand. But previously, you see her writing with her right hand. So, like, they're forcing her to use her non-dominant hand in the thank you note thing. Anyway, just something to note. Also, there was a viral post online that showed the outfits Gemma wore matched the outfits that the Egan women wore in the like Great Hall that they visited in season 1 of the show. And so there's a speculation that like maybe these scenarios are scenarios from like the Egan women's lives that they went through or something like that. I think that's also like a possibility. Unclear exactly like how these events all tie into either Gemma's life or the Egan women's life. I made a comment last week about how the people who are like doubles of the 4 primary severed workers are they're lookalikes, and I commented that it didn't look like they were actually doing anything. It looked like they were when they're pressing buttons. It looked like they were only observing. It didn't look like they were actually impacting what was happening to the workers. And YouTube comment Julia Gulia writes, the Woes Hollow lookalikes were credited as Shadow Mark and Shadow Irving. These guys were credited as Mark Watcher and Dylan Watcher. So I don't think they're supposed to be the same. Like people were saying, oh, are those doubles the same as the ones from episode 4? They're not. They're different actors, and they are credited differently. Maybe it's a red herring, but I think it's a sign that I was accurate in describing that they're primarily observing, and they also look different than the previous doubles we've seen. Okay. Last week I was saying I had confusion about what Gemma was referring to when she said, it's one of those things where you draw a duck or a rabbit or something. Got a lot of comments from people. Patrick, I'm really disappointed you didn't help me out here because apparently this is a super common thing in the 80s or whatever, 90s. Ben O comments at decodingtv.com. I think those things where you have to draw a duck is a reference to the old magazine ads from Art Instruction Inc., where they'd promise prizes for submitting a drawing of some animal character. Then the company would follow up, would use those submissions to follow up with salesmen for their art course. That would line up well with Dave's theory that Lumen is using whatever Gem is doing with the cards as a foot in the door to get her in the program, end quote. I have never seen this, but apparently it's super widespread. Patrick, you've never seen this before as well, right? Like,
no, I'm seeing if you go on Google, if you search Art Instruction Inc., you will see examples of like draw me, like over 5,000 prizes awarded monthly, and then that can turn into a scholarship if yours is picked. I don't think this was in these illustrations don't look 80s. They look a little earlier than that. So I don't know. I buy it. I buy it. But this feels a little bit before your eyes' time.
Yeah. And then finally, Stephen David Miller over at decodingtv.com writes, you guys mentioned Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, and I couldn't shake the comparison in my head as I watched either, not just the look and feel, or the central idea of modifying your brain to get rid of painful memories. For me, the most glaring similarity is Dr. Maurer and his creepy behavior with various severed versions of Gemma, including reusing a line Mark had used. It just screams Elijah Wood trying to replicate moments of connection with Clementine while also being a cog in the machine that effed with her and her partner's heads. End quote. Great call out. Basically, Dr. Bauer is the Elijah Wood of this show.
Sure.
So appreciate the comparison there. There's like a couple of other assorted things about last week's episode that I thought might be worth mentioning. Somebody pointed out that like the death of Ivan Ilyich, he doesn't die at the end. First of all, they said like it's a novella, so the fact that it's a thick book doesn't really make much sense. The doctor says, let me guess, he dies at the end. Actually, he dies at the beginning of the book, so it shows how clueless the doctor is. There's like a bunch of other little like Easter eggs and things like that, but like I don't think we can cover them all. Suffice to say, very dense episode, lots of great moments within it, and really appreciate everyone's engagement on the YouTube channel and at decodingtv.com and at decodingtv@gmail.com. Love to dive into something like that here on the podcast. All right, Patrick, it's time to talk about what actually happened in this week's episode of the show. Season 2, Episode 8, entitled Sweet Vitriol. Cobalt is driving to Salt's Neck still. We arrive at Salt's Neck. It's like a stereotypical New England seaside town, but it looks mostly abandoned and not very pleasant. This is one of the few episodes of the show where there is no opening credit sequence. So something special about this episode. Special in how bad it was. No, I'm just...
Well, hold on. Has it only happened twice?
I believe it's happened 3 previous times. It's happened in the season 1 premiere, the season 2 premiere, I believe, and then the Woe's Hollow episode.
Okay. I was wondering if there was any connection between, like Woe's Hollow takes place in an undisclosed sort of location. Like we don't have a sense of the geography, but it's seemingly disconnected from the town, like the town that we spend most of our time in. And here we also are more geographically disconnected. And so I was wondering if
I think that's a thematic connection between, like the premiere episodes you can say like are their own thing, and then the other ones where they haven't had it, it's like they're outside of the office, they're outside of Kier, like the outside
of like
place.
Lumen's direct I mean, obviously we'll get into it. There's a lot of Lumen in this town, but it is not, it is abandoned. Like Lumen has left this place, and I wonder if we'll end up finding that to be one of those thematic ties as the show goes on, that like, oh, every time they were outside of a direct sphere of influence, the title card got dropped.
Cobalt arrives at a cafe called the Drippy Pot Cafe, and she's brushing her teeth in an alley. She sees someone breathing into a bag nearby. At the Drippy Pot Cafe, everyone there is old, and the waiter owner is handing out strange nondescript bottles of stuff, which I believe later we discover is ether. Cobalt shows up and asks him to meet her at the factory nearby. It's clearly like it's an old abandoned Lumen factory. And it's clear there are formerly co-workers, aka child laborers, together under the Lumen influence. Cobalt says she needs to see Sissy, which, by the way, like my interpretation is that Sissy is her sister, right? Is that kind of where you landed on the...
That's a very common way for when children are younger and they have trouble pronouncing things, like Sissy is often a way of talking about one's sibling, because Sissy is easier to say than sister. So sometimes that can stick. So that was my interpretation as well.
And it becomes clear that she still abides by the 9. That's what the guy. So for the guy that she's talking to is played by a very great character actor named James LeGros. Right, that's the guy from the Drippy Pot Cafe. And by the way, his name is something that I didn't really fully catch. I think she says it at the end. Like I think she calls him Hampton, but I'm not sure. Did you catch his name?
I
think
didn't know.
She says Hampton, I think, at the end. Again, we didn't have the closed caption, so I wasn't sure what his name was, but I apologize. Like, you don't need to comment what his name is. By the time the next episode happens, I'll have figured it out. But I think she says Hampton. I'm not sure. I'll refer to him as the guy for the rest of the episode. Anyway, he says to her, "Oh, Sissy still abides by the 9, or she still lives by the 9." And you might ask the question, what are the 9? Patrick Klepek, when you heard about it, did you figure that out, or
I assume it was referring to the tempers, or something
no.
along.
There are 4 tempers, but there are 9 values of lumen.
Okay.
Here's the thing. Kumashi73 wrote on Reddit that there was a special featurette released at San Diego Comic-Con where Milchek lists the 9 core principles as part of a lumen training video. He then says, "Me, I'm a Verve man," and smirks at the camera just for an instant. Miss Cobalt also says them all to herself while sitting at her desk in episode 4. So thanks to Kumashi from Reddit for mentioning that. Here's a clip from that San Diego Comic-Con video.
Here at Lumen, we are united by the 9 core principles put forth by our founder, Keir Egan. Vision, verve, wit, cheer, humility, benevolence, nimbleness, probity, wiles. We invite you to observe and treasure these principles, which will become the bedrock of your Innie's life.
So those are the 9 principles. Vision, verve, wit, cheer, humility, benevolence, nimbleness, probity, and wiles. Feels pretty random to me, but I'm not the person who created a very successful sci-fi company.
Well, and also, I mean, when I think of Milchek, I think the definition of verb, which is vigor and spirit and enthusiasm. Like
Absolutely.
The man embodies these principles.
All right. But anyway, it's kind of her way of saying, hey, she still subscribes to the religion of Lumen, even though everyone's life in this town has been ruined by Lumen.
Religion, cult, indoctrination, who could say?
They arrive at Sissy's house. It's Miss Cobalt's sister. They argue for a bit about their mother's last days. Cobalt wants to know what her last words were and accuses Sissy of disconnecting her from life support involuntarily. Sissy slaps her. We see as Patrick indicated, there's a lot of little Easter eggs. Like she goes into Sissy's room. We see there's an award on the wall, Quarterly Striver, Year of Vision for Celestine Sissy Cobalt. Anyway, Cobalt disconnects the phone, asks to go to her mother's room, and searches for the key. Again, she goes into among Sissy's things. A lot of Lumen Easter eggs in the Sissy room. We're not going to run them down here. There's other videos on the internet that will do that for you.
Oh, yeah. I'll wait for someone to tell me what at a certain point, I stop pausing because I will wait for someone to tell me I'm not doing this.
Wow.
I'm not.
I mean, you say
it shows you're just smarter than this is part of my issue with the structure of this episode is that Severance is a show that rewards all sorts of different layers of analysis and interpretation and attention upon first viewings, subsequent viewings. And there's nothing, or very rarely do I feel like when I'm watching Severance, that it is making me feel bad because I didn't pause to look at something that it's calling attention to. It's sort of like, hey, everything you sort of need to know is right here in the show. But then if you want to have some fun, we're smart and we're leaving other things here for you and the dedicated audience. But there's a way that this episode was shot that was making me feel bad that look, if you want me to read it, then have a character talk about it. But I'm not going to sit here and scrub through every 10 to 15 seconds to capture that shot.
I think where I agree with you, Patrick, is that there's not that much else going on in the episode, right? It's dragging out its central core mystery for the whole of the episode, which is why is Miss Cobalt there? What is she looking for in Salt Snack?
Yeah, there's 10 minutes of plot, and it's 37 minutes.
Less. It's 8 minutes of plot, Anyway. She eventually finds the key to her mom's room. She enters her mom's room. She touches the blanket, observes a photo of a young girl on the wall. She takes the medical tubing out of her pocket, which we'd seen previously in the car, and she reattaches it to her mom's breathing machine, and she lies down in the bed. She tries breathing through the tube. It's kind of like she's taking the place of her mother. She's wailing. She's crying out. Night falls. Man comes back in the room and they talk about their mother a little bit, and asks if she wants to get high by pouring ether into a rag and inhaling it.
Hell yeah.
Pretty troubling. Pretty troubling. Anyway, I think they kiss, right? If I recall correctly. And then Cobalt goes into the back area of the house. There's a little cellar area, and she's looking through all these old things, and we see, like Patrick said, a bunch of little Easter eggs, right? We see a yearbook. We see that she was a Wintertide fellow. She's also valedictorian. I freeze frame some of these yearbook things. She's valedictorian. Wintertide Fellow. Also,
So it seems like that's that is a Lumen run funded like school. I don't know if these days you're still calling it a school for girls or boys, but like it's an academy, like it's an extension of Lumen.
Yeah.
That obviously they are still, what we know is they are still sending people. Like Wintertide is still operating,
still alive, yeah.
which is
yeah. The yearbook said Myrtle School for Girls,
right.
as FYI. So like, yeah, you're probably right that it's kind of an extension of Lumen's influence. And then she finds a bus that says Jamie Egan Wintertide Fellowship Harmony Cobalt Year of Wiles. Again, one of the 9 principles. By the way, like in my opinion, I think this is the principles are a parody or satire of like other companies that have principles like this, of which one of them is Amazon, which has like I think around 14, 17 leadership principles.
It's a lot. I just
that are
remember
not
17.
They added a few. That's the thing. I actually knew them all, but then they added a bunch of them. So like, now it's at a number that I don't know what it is. But anyway,
bonus episode coming.
Yeah,
David and Patrick go over Amazon's core leadership principles and the relationship to them.
I will say that the leadership principles are really like, they're much more descriptive. Like the thing is like the Lumen principles are Lumen values, I think they're called, are like kind of vague. Vision, verve, wit, cheer, humility, benevolence, symbolism.
It's religious manipulation that can be bent towards like the means of Lumen.
Yeah.
Like vis-a-vis whatever the personality type that they're working with at the academy, right? Like it all molds you into a, propaganda soldier.
Yeah. There's something like about the vagueness that I think is nice. But anyway, it's different at Amazon where it's like customer obsession.
Sure,
it's
a little that's specific.
Clear.
That's a thing you could, there's vagueness within that, but it is like a okay.
I get that. I kind of get what that means.
Right.
Anyway, all right. So, she finds the thing that she's looking for, which is this bust of Egan, and then she like pries it open. And inside, there's a notebook that's been placed inside the hollowed out bust. She goes back in the house, talks to Sissy, and it becomes clear, my designs.
Mine! My designs!
These were her designs. The circuit blueprint, the overtime contingency, the Glasgow block, all of it. By the way, she's only mentioning stuff that's been heard on the show. Randomly. Anyway. And then her sister says Jamie Egan was the inventor, and it's like, she says, extraordinary. Why have you never spoken of this? And Cobalt says, I was told Kira's knowledge is for all, that if I sought credit, I would be banished. Sissy then tries to burn the notebook. And then she then reveals to Cobalt, it was her hand that removed the tube, not mine. Your mother was a coward, more sick in the soul than the body, filled with malice and resentment. I thought you were different, my flower. I tried to help you grow, but now I see you are a weed, just as she was. End quote.
Ouch.
Yeah. So then, the dude, who I think is named Captain, but I'm not sure. Sorry if I didn't. You don't need to write in. Kind of gives her control of the car and says, "Hey, you can have the car. Lumen is coming. We know that Drummond has been to see Sissy. They're trying to track Cobalt down, and they've said to Cobalt, hey, if you come back, like we'll forgive you." But Cobalt doesn't believe that. So then Cobalt takes the car, drives off. And Devin calls again and explains Mark's been reintegrated. And then she's like, tell me everything. Dun, dun, dun. They're all going to team up and take on Lumen together now. All right. I mean, this sucks for a variety of reasons. Number one, the idea that Cobalt is like a genius inventor who like came up with all the Severance stuff. It
defies logic.
It makes the whole show worse. Like before, like the Severance technology is like, oh, like this is technology that only could have been come up with by like a massive mysterious corporation that has its arms in like multiple different fields, psychology, engineering. Like all these different things need to come together. Neurobiology, like all these things need to come together to like create like this chip or whatever the physical structure needed to like all this stuff. And they never explained it because it's like it's more. They never like said like here's how the Severance chip works. Ragabi does a little bit, but like it's really mostly kept like in the background. And now it's like, hey, it's actually a girl came up with it in a notebook. That's how it's invented. And then they stole her idea. It's like, okay.
But here's the problem.
That's stupid. I'm sorry.
Now they have to explain more of it.
Yeah, that sucks.
And you know what I mean? Like you've opened this door.
Yeah.
Like you have to walk in it. Like had this door never been opened,
right?
There's so much that could. I think the show has walked a really fine line between.
Could have been supernatural. Severance could have been supernatural. Like it could have been.
You just hand wave it. A mysterious, the mysterious company does mysterious things. And even if it was like reduced down to like the reason Severance works is because she was raised in this cult, indoctrinated through this like academy, and had a propensity for science. And the only reason we were able to get Severance over the finish line was because she came up with like. The chip works, you know what I mean? Like, if it could go down to like she was mission critical, and they stole it from her, sure, I could 100% like believe that. There's nothing about like her performance to suggest to me she can't be a scientist. But the idea that she has again like the lost style, like we're going through a book, like an encyclopedia of how none of Severance worked, none of what Lumen is now, like. Did Lumen abandon this town? Did Lumen abandon everything that was happening here because she came up with Severance? And I don't know. It
She's
just
the
doesn't.
linchpin of the whole thing, basically.
Yes,
it's like,
that's so much to put on a character.
It's so silly and ridiculous.
It's silly. It's silly. I think that's damning in a show like this. Like,
yes.
This is a show that is on its face, like all like high concept shows have an inherent silliness that you can hopefully buy into, and the show's done a good job of helping you buy into it. But this is silly territory, and it's bad parts of shows like this, and it's where they can unravel if like this is the direction they start heading in too far down.
Well, not content with merely one ridiculous plot development, the show then delivers a 1-2 punch because Mark is suddenly interested in teaming up with Miss Cobalt. So the idea is like Miss Cobalt is guys, she's actually a good guy because yes, she was completely taken in by the cult, but she's actually an aggrieved inventor who invented all the Severance stuff, and they stole her ideas, and now you should root for her. Right? Is kind of what the show's saying.
To what end?
I guess she wants to go back and take down the system.
She collaborated with the system till she was kicked. Like, you know what I mean? Like,
right?
Her aims don't align with our central characters, but the show is acting like we're assembling a team.
Right. It is. I think that's what the arc of Cobalt is going to be. It's like, oh, she was a believer, but then they kicked her out, even though she was loyal. And not only was she loyal, she invented their world-changing technology. And that when they kicked her out, that's when they were ungrateful. And now she's like, now she's on our side of they must be taken down. Which is like
of course, there'll be another revelation where they discover that she was fully aware of Gemma and like her being tortured in like the floor. So I just,
I'm not.
That feels like now like was unfortunate. And maybe look, I have great faith in this show. Like I'm not gonna let one episode completely shake how I feel about it. But what I worry is something like Cobalt knowing the nature of Gemma and her situation. That is now us as the audience getting really far ahead of the characters and waiting for a plot point, a revelation to happen for these characters that is so obvious on its face to the audience that you're just, it's not the kind of tension I root for. Like, it's one thing to know something the characters don't know, and you're like, ooh, that's going to be juicy. This feels frustrating. And maybe the show will be smart. And the beginning of the next episode that you and I watch next week, David, the show's be like, we're like a little messy, but like we're working on it, and like it'll get addressed really quickly, and it'll follow the pattern this season has done, which is like things you think would happen later are addressed and worked through immediately. I hope that's the truth, and we get to somewhere more interesting than where this seems to be headed. And the thing that's frustrating even further is the team they seem to be sort of gesturing towards of like Milchick, and like there were pieces in play that naturally fit competing interests and tensions within the structure of Lumen itself without bringing and you could I understand the impulse to not get rid of Patricia Arquette, and I think there was a way for her to be present in the show, present in the storyline,
right,
but not re-injected as a main lore defining character.
Yes,
and that's what this feels forced in a show that has
100%.
otherwise been really smart and organic and like willing to shed story in order to like fit the bigger picture. And this feels like an instance of, well, we've got this piece and we're gonna jam it in. And I hope I'm wrong. I'm just rooting. I'm hope we are wrong by the end of this season.
I 100% agree with everything Patrick Klepek just said. Patricia Arquette is an Academy Award-winning actor, and I think they're like, hey, we got to give her something to do. But you're right. Like, what should have happened with Miss Cobalt is she should have been removed from Lumen, and she should have like gone home, and then like at one point, Mark checks in with her late in season 2 or early season,
or let all of this happen off screen. Like this entire episode, it could have happened. We didn't have to witness it.
I'm saying like I'm agreeing with what you said about she should not be like a critical part of the plot. That's what because her arc is like basically complete. She's a true believer. She went too far. She got kicked out of the company. Like that's enough. That's a great arc. And now they're like, oh, but what if she actually came up with the tech and she's going to team up with it? And it makes no goddamn sense. Like, what I mean by that is emotionally it makes no sense. Why would Mark want to work with Miss Cobalt? It makes no sense. Okay.
But convenient because now if reintegration was going to kill him and Ragabi has left, oh, well, we just happened to conveniently, boy, found another expert in the field. Because Mark should probably die, right? Like, I mean, that's sort of, I think Ragabi is sort of like, okay, fuck it. I'm out of here.
Well,
like,
he did survive. He did survive at the end.
Well, he survived this. But what I'm saying is, I don't know that, maybe he's fine, maybe he's not. Ragabi's not going to stick around to help or find out. He's like, okay, you're on your own if you're going to involve.
Well, she only did that because Devin wanted to call Miss Cobalt.
Right.
So it's like they're trading.
It's convenient for Mark and for Devin to just like have another Severance expert fall into like, gee, if he has like another seizure, what are they going to do? I don't know. Ask the person who has a notebook that probably says what to do in the case of a seizure. You know what I mean? Like, it's just,
yeah, pretty rough.
Not great.
Rough stuff. It almost threatens to crash the Severance car, I would say, this episode.
It's worrisome. It's
extremely worrisome.
It's more worrisome than there's bad episodes and then there's episodes that suggest cracks in the foundation.
Right.
And we're hoping they can patch it up.
Okay. Was this the worst episode of Severance ever made? Like, in my opinion, this is the worst episode. Out of all the episodes of Severance, this is the worst, my least favorite, and also could potentially ruin the season. We'll see.
But it sticks out like a sore thumb, right? Like
right, yeah.
I've never felt there are episodes of Severance I like more than others. I don't actually remember coming out of an episode and being like, well, that felt like kind of a waste of like. It's always just like I like ones more than others, or more interesting than one. But I've always enjoyed my time. This is the one where it's like oh, like a steady up and down, like ooh up, ooh way up, and then this was like way down, and like I hope they're just back to baseline, at the by the time you and I are talking next week.
Hey everyone, David Chen here. Thank you so much for watching that video from Decoding TV. If you want to get an audio version of the show, all you got to do is go to podcast.decodingtv.com. And if you want to support what we do, get ad-free episodes of the podcast and also bonus episodes of the podcast, go to decodingtv.com and become a paid member. Of course, you can also like and subscribe for more. We appreciate it. Thanks. See you later.